Hello there, welcome back to the possibly least popular series I've ever created on YouTube, and that is Back to the Soong family. I had to postpone the continuation of this series because of Star Trek Picard Season 3, so there will be spoilers for Star Trek Picard Season 3 if you've not seen that yet in this episode. This episode is on lore, which again, I'm going back to. I've already done some of the sort of subsequent episodes to this, but let's forget that I did that and carry on. Before we get started, like, share, subscribe, comment down below and hit the bell notification icon because that is the real subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with all the uploads from this channel. Lore was created on the Federation colony world of Omicron Theta by Dr. Noonien Soong and his wife Juliana Soong. He was at least the fourth android in the series constructed by the good doctor, constructed with the advanced and incredible positronic net. Lore was by far the most advanced and evolved iteration in this series so far, surpassing his predecessors in every way, although it's conceivable that the physical body of B4, Lore, and Data were probably all pretty much identical. The operating system, shall we say, in the head was where it all differed. Lore, although incredibly intelligent and very advanced, was emotional, unbalanced, and a little unstable. He made the local colonists unsettled. They called for his dismantling and deactivation because he was a cold, callous, capricious individual, and the colonists didn't really like him. And I imagine with his pale complexion and emotional instability and callousness, there was a lot of uncanny valley going on with every time anybody looked at him. Lore was a difficult individual to like. He felt, in his paranoia, because he basically thought that everyone in the universe was out to get him all the time, he thought that the colonists, and to be fair in this instance they were out to get him because, again, cold, callous and capricious, wanted to destroy him. So he would destroy them first. He reached out to the only thing he knew of, the way to get rid of the colonists. He had learnt about the creature known as the crystalline entity. He reached out to this creature and offered up the planet and its population as a food source to it. He managed to do this, unfortunately, before Dr. Soong agreed and gave in to the demands of the colonists to deactivate Lore and dismantle him. Lore would be dismantled and put away in a laboratory some point around 2338. His exact date of construction before this is unknown, but it's not believed to have been very long, as Data was already under construction by this point, and although Data was completed before the crystalline entity attacked, Lore would not be reactivated, and Data didn't really know about his brother. When the crystalline entity wiped out the colony, Lore was safe and sound, buried underground in the doctor's laboratory, abandoned and left behind, probably for good reason. No one wanted to come back and get Lore. He was not rescued, so to speak, until the 2360, specifically 2369, when the Enterprise D would recover him. It would find him dismantled, and Lore would lie instantly, saying that he was the younger brother and that Data was the mistake. Data had come before him and was... The colonists didn't like him. He basically said all the things that the colonists said about him were actually about Data, and that's why Data had been dismantled. And Lore was actually the evolved, new, better, improved version of Data. This, of course, was a lie, and people did manage to see through it eventually, but not before Lore deactivated his brother, managed to duplicate the facial tic that he mysteriously had in his face, which made him look evil, onto Data, assumed Data's identity and tried to be Data. But very quickly, people realized that this wasn't the case, and he couldn't keep up the masquerade. As Spock once put it, it was harder for a barbarian to appear civilized than a civilized man was to pretend to be a barbarian. And that's in relation to Terrans, but you can see the thing here. In many ways, Lore and Data are a dark reflection of one another. Lore is almost the mirror universe version of Data in a lot of ways. And Data could never be like Lore the same way Lore could never be like Data. They can try and pretend, but it'll never really work. In a lot of ways, Lore had things that Data wanted. Lore had emotion. He was, in a way, he was closer to humanity than Data was. Soong had scaled back some of those particular features, but in Lore they were unstable. Lore was eventually uncovered aboard the Enterprise, of course, and was beamed into space, where he floated about for a couple of years before being found by a Packlet trading ship. He would, I assume, execute the crew of the Packlet vessel, not wanting to fly around with a bunch of space idiots, who'd probably sell him for scrap at the earliest opportunity. He stole their ship and would eventually find his way, with the recall order given out by the creator Noonien Soong, that him and Data both believe had been killed by the crystalline entity, finding his father, quote-unquote, alive and well on a world deep in the Alpha Quadrant. The two of them would arrive, but Soong had been hard at work creating the very thing for Data that he hadn't really given for Lore, a sort of stable emotion chip. Unfortunately, because of his jealous nature and desire to possess everything Data had, Lore would steal the chip by once again impersonating Data, but not before injuring Soong, and which would result in his death. Although this probably wasn't intentional, the callous way and disregard he gave to his father, he didn't really care that he killed him. He stole the emotion chip and fled the scene before the Enterprise could stop him. Later, he would encounter a group of Borg who had been severed from the collective thanks to the reintegration of Third of Five, otherwise known as Hugh, which had caused an error in the collective, which had caused all these drones to separate. He became their new leader, making them all kinds of promises, saying that basically, you want to be more like me, you want to be fully autonomous, fully mechanical, that's the better way, just remove all the flesh, because organic life forms are weak and simple. And he convinced them that they should be more mechanical, but he actually had no idea how to achieve this goal. He couldn't completely remove the organic systems without killing them, so he just started bolting on extra mechanical. Some of the Borg rebelled against him, and some served him. They started attacking worlds, and they were eventually discovered by Starfleet, where the Enterprise D would follow their vessel into a transwarp conduit, finding them on a planet in the Gamma Quadrant. Once again, Lore did his thing. He went all evil and supervillainy. He'd be twirling a mustache if he had one. And although he was eventually incapacitated by Data, Picard, and all the free Borg on the planet, while the Enterprise D took care of the ship in orbit, Data would eventually deactivate him, while his brother slowly told him that he actually loved him very much. And from then on, he was kept deactivated. He was sent back to Earth and ultimately to Mars for study, although they didn't want to replicate him exactly because, of course, Lore was, evil. They did want to make more positronic Soong-type androids for use across the Federation, something they would eventually achieve by studying both Lore and B4. And they would create all the androids that would be used in the synth attack later on Mars. Lore was kept technically deactivated, but he was studied by Alt and Soong, who would later create a golem, a new type of android body, where he would integrate B4, Lal, Data, and Lore, as well as a copy of his own sort of neural engrams into this new android body. Now, B4, Lal, and Alton would all be suppressed and absorbed, leaving just Data and Lore to fight for supremacy over the body. Now, it would seem, because Lore was more aggressive, he would win. Eventually, they were allowed in sort of a simulated environment to engage with one another. And it seemed like Lore was winning. He took memory after memory after memory and personality bits from Data, and he kept stealing it. But Data knew, because of Lore's jealous, possessive nature and his need to be better than Data all the time, he would absorb these memories. But by doing so, Lore slowly began to turn into Data, and Data turned the tables on him and eventually would win by Lore becoming him. And although the two brothers would have a fairly sentimental moment of saying goodbye to one another at this time and seemingly go peacefully into the void, this was never Lore's intention. If he'd had his way, he would have murdered Data and taken his place once again. And we would have just had Lore waking up in the golem and not our sweet beloved Data. Ultimately, this was the final end of Lore. But what does everyone think? Was this really a good ending for Lore, or should they have left it where he was deactivated on the Borg planet and told Data how much he truly loved him as his brother, and was deactivated and just taken away for study, and they should have just left it at that? Or was this integration, was Alton wrong? Should he have just left Lore out of the equation completely? I mean, B4 was fine, Lore was fine, Data was fine, put himself in there, great, but was it a risk, too great a risk perhaps, to put a power-mad sociopath that hated organic life, like Lore, in a new android body? Tell me in the comments down below. And that was the life and times of Lore. A flawed, but very advanced and highly intelligent individual, and perfect foil for Data. He, as I said, he was basically a mirror of Data. Everything Data both wanted to be, and could potentially be, in terms of emotion and humanity, but corrupted, twisted, and angry, like a spoilt child rebelling against its parents. which basically summed up Lore's entire existence. Let's face the truth though, Lore's biggest problem was that in a dick measuring contest between him and Data, he'd be insecure that his nut and bolt was only a 3-inch, while Data's is a 6, fully functional, and programmed in multiple techniques, and he just can't handle it. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share, and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.